These blocks on the side of the beam here work to support the decks between the beams. Above these blocks there will be 2 large fuel tanks, so I made sure that they could handle the pressure. Made from a hardwood, they are clamped and epoxy glued in place, followed by 2 layers of glass cloth. Thickened fillets of epoxy and a radius on the bottom edge of the block allows the glass to adhere correctly to the surface. I've done the same on this beam as the last one. 1 layer of a 2-part epoxy primer before the 2 layers of top coat. I use a roller to apply it and a brush around the smaller fiddly areas. Now the beam is painted, there's a lot of work to do on the boat in preparation to lash the beam in place. The winter time slows things down a bit, but a couple breaks in the weather allows me to get a start. On the outsides of the hulls there will be lashing cleats for the beam. The troughs on beams 2 and 3 are smaller, so we can't use the same eye-bolt systems as beams 1 and 4. First thing is to remove all the brackets inside the hull and patch the holes. This took me days to remove the old stubborn bolts. The brackets will be moved directly under the beam so I can repurpose them for securing the lashing cleats. Having the bracket on the inside of the hull will help spread the load of each bolt.
What are you doing?
What am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm just taking up the inside of these holes in here that you just seen from the outside, so I can put the thickened out epoxy in them and it won't leak through to the inside.
Some dolphins.
It's taken 2 days now to get the bolts out from here. The way they're on the bracket, it was really hard to bang them through. Got them out, I've grinded it and sanded it with a bevel on it, and now I can layer some little patches of glass and fill the holes with epoxy, and they'll be all covered. Then I can move these holes across for where I'm going to put the lashing pads to hold the beam. I've cut patches of cloth, 4 for each hole, staggering smaller to match the bevel from sanding. I find it easier to wet out the 4 layers together on a table as one patch. It's pretty easy to then carry them over and stick in place. It's important that the largest patch attaches to the repair first. The large surface area contacting the hull allows for a much stronger repair. One layer of peel ply is added at the end and rolled out. This helps get all the air out and allows for a smoother finish. Now that it is dried, I've removed the peel ply and I start sanding. I give it a light hit with the angle grinder to remove most of the bulk, and then a sand with the orbital, and it's done. You're on the boat for the first time. Show us your face. Hello. What do you think? Is this good up here?
She doesn't look impressed.
She doesn't?
You will be once it's done. You'll be very impressed.
Now onto the beam trough. There's heaps of sanding to do and holes to patch before we can paint it and bring the beam down. It's always a bit of a kick in the teeth when you find some more rotten wood. But I've found some more, so I just deal with it. The process is always much the same. Remove the area, check the wood. If it's good, repair it. If it's not, remove more. Here you can see some of the rotten framing on the inside. I'll have to cut this out and add a new piece of Oregon. I'll remove some more of the plywood first, just to make sure there's no more rot. It's usually in moments like these I think, was it the best move to sell everything we owned and move down the coast to fix this old wooden boat? The boat is definitely a lot worse than the description of the boat when we bought it, but that's part of buying an old boat, and we're here now, so we just have to tackle it one bit at a time and do everything the best we can to avoid these problems in the future. I didn't expect to be fixing this area, but with a small gap in the weather I had to make do with what I had. This piece of Oregon was made to fit with saw cuts and a bit of work with a chisel. Unfortunately my GoPro died this day, but I glued on the timber with some thickened epoxy glue and used screws to hold it in place. Here I am the next day. I use a flappy disc to sand off all the excess glue and the paint around the area. In preparation for paint, I sand both beam troughs using the grinder. Parts of the wooden strip that hold up the deck above the trough were too rotten to be repaired. I glue them with the epoxy glue and use screws to hold them in place until the glue sets. A layer of glass was added over the previous repair. I wouldn't usually add the glass, put the filler on and glue a bit of wood to that patch at the same time, but as I'm on time constraints between the weather, I've decided to do it this way. In these troughs, there's a spacer that sits under the beam. As I'm moving the beam across to allow room for the lashings, I've had to add another piece of wood in next to it. So in the previous footage before, you've seen that I was adding these to the decks of the beam trough, and also adding some strips to hold up the deck that sits above the trough itself. After looking at the plans, I realised that I made a few mistakes there. Having this in the centre means that most of the force from the beam is on this point. So I've decided instead to run a long piece of rubber the whole way along the trough to help evenly distribute the forces there. I was rushing a fair bit when I did that, realised that I also missed out the spaces. So I've made these spaces, and these sit against the trough. It's a piece of Morocco hardwood. This will sit against the trough with a piece of polyurethane plastic there to help with wear and tear, and that'll space the beam out, allowing me room to put my lashings. This bit of wood here, the bolt that goes through the beam will go through the trough. It's slotted to allow a little bit of movement, and then it will come through this bit of wood. So this is another piece of hardwood. This will be on the inside of the holes with this piece of polyurethane plastic as well, and this is just going to help spread that load and strengthen the whole areas around where the bolts will go through. So now what I'm going to do is thin out some epoxy, brush it on so it soaks in, and then glue these with epoxy, clamp in place, and then hopefully when there's some more sunny weather I can get down to the boat, glue these on, re-prime these areas, remove these bits of wood, and then paint that whole trough ready for the beam to go in. Everything a little wrap up with some emery paper. Make sure I get a good stick. The next day I'm back down at the boat. Time to glue these blocks into the beam trough. As I want to avoid using screws whenever I can, we will use wedges to apply pressure on the blocks while the glue sets. It's easy to get excited about modern tools and overlook the simplicity and practicality of old techniques. Sarah's grandfather Graham has come down to give me a hand, and some of his tips for wedging the timber are priceless.
Pretty good. You got your end? Yeah. No, we're fine. Good luck.
Thanks for watching this episode. On the next one, We'll take the beam down to the boat, bring the next one home along with the wheelhouse fork. We'll also show some of the construction of our hatches and the hinges that go along with them.
Thanks for watching our video.